The screams echoing through the abandoned warehouse weren't what they expected to hear. What started as a routine intimidation mission had turned into something far more dangerous than any of them could have imagined. Sarah Martinez sat bound to a metal chair, her wrists raw from the rope, but her eyes held no fear, only calculation. The three men who had cornered her outside the base thought they had captured just another military woman walking alone at night. They had no idea they had just made the biggest mistake of their lives. What they didn't know was that Sarah wasn't just any soldier. She was a decorated Special Forces operator with over a decade of combat experience across 3 continents. She had survived Taliban ambushes, escaped from enemy compounds, and eliminated high-value targets that others deemed impossible to reach. But, more importantly, what her captors couldn't see beneath her calm exterior was years of specialized training designed for exactly this situation. As the leader of the group stepped forward with a cruel smile, checking his phone for the ransom demand he was about to send, Sarah began counting. Not the minutes until help would arrive, because help wasn't coming. She was counting the steps each man took, memorizing their positions, calculating angles and distances. She was doing what she had been trained to do for years, turning a trap into an opportunity. The warehouse fell silent except for the distant hum of traffic. None of them knew that in exactly 4 minutes and 37 seconds, everything would change. The hunters were about to become the hunted, and they would learn why cornering a Special Forces operator is never just a crime. It's a death sentence. Sarah Martinez had always been careful about her evening runs around Fort Bragg. As a master sergeant in the 75th Ranger Regiment, she understood better than most that predators often watched military bases, looking for isolated targets. But tonight felt different. The October air was crisp, and after 3 weeks of intensive training exercises, she needed to clear her head before the next deployment briefing. She had chosen the route deliberately, a path that took her along the perimeter fence, past the main gate, and through the small town adjacent to the base. It was well lit, frequently patrolled, and typically safe. What she hadn't anticipated was the broken streetlight near Miller's Corner, the one that had been working perfectly when she passed it 20 minutes earlier on her way out. The van appeared from nowhere, sliding to a stop just as she reached the darkened section of sidewalk. 3 men emerged with practiced efficiency, their movements coordinated like they had done this before. The first man was tall and lean, with prison tattoos creeping up his neck. The second was broader, wearing a baseball cap pulled low over his face. The third stayed by the van, engine running, watching for witnesses. Sarah's training kicked in immediately. She assessed the situation in seconds. Civilian clothes, no visible weapons initially, but the way they moved suggested military or law enforcement background. The leader's stance was too confident, too practiced. These weren't random opportunists. They had planned this. "Easy now, soldier girl," the tall one said, his voice carrying a southern accent thick with menace. "We just want to talk." Sarah stopped running but didn't retreat. Her breathing remained controlled, her posture relaxed but ready. Years of combat experience had taught her that the first few seconds of any confrontation determined the outcome. She needed information before she acted. "Talk about what?" she asked, her voice steady despite her heart rate climbing. The broader man circled behind her while the leader kept talking. Standard pincer movement. Amateur, but effective against most targets. What they didn't know was that Sarah had been ambushed by Taliban fighters who made these 3 look like children playing soldier. "Your little boyfriend owes some people money," the leader continued, stepping closer. "Army boys think they can gamble in our town and walk away when the debts get too high." Sarah's mind raced. She had no boyfriend, no gambling debts, no connections to the local criminal element. Either they had the wrong person, or this was a fishing expedition. Neither option was good. "I think you have the wrong soldier," she said, taking a half step backward to create distance from the man behind her. "Nah, we got the right one," the driver called from the van. "Sergeant Sarah Martinez, 75th Rangers, apartment 4B on Elm Street." The detailed information sent a chill down Sarah's spine. They had done their homework, which meant this wasn't spontaneous. Someone had given them her name, her unit, her address. But who? And why? The leader produced a taser from his jacket. "Here's how this works, Sergeant. You come with us quietly, we make a phone call, your boyfriend pays up, and everyone goes home happy. You try to be a hero, and things get complicated real fast. Sarah saw the broad man behind her reach for something, likely zip ties or handcuffs. She had perhaps 2 seconds before they tried to restrain her. 2 seconds to decide whether to fight here on the street or allow herself to be taken, hoping for a better opportunity later. The tactical part of her brain weighed the options rapidly. Fighting now meant engaging 3 unknowns in poor lighting with civilian vehicles nearby. If they were armed beyond the taser, innocent people could get hurt. If she went with them, she could gather intelligence about who was behind this and why. But there was another consideration. These men clearly knew she was military, but they were still trying to take her. Either they were incredibly stupid, or they had additional backup she couldn't see. Neither possibility encouraged immediate resistance. "All right," she said, raising her hand slightly. "Let's talk." "But not here." The leader smiled, but it wasn't pleasant. "Smart girl. Van's nice and private." As the broad man approached with zip ties, Sarah made note of several crucial details. The leader favored his right side, suggesting an old injury to his left leg. The driver kept checking his mirrors obsessively, nervous, possibly inexperienced. The broad man moved like former military, but had gotten soft. His breathing was already labored from the short chase. She allowed them to bind her hands behind her back, noting that they used military-grade restraints, but applied them incorrectly, tight enough to be uncomfortable, but with enough slack that someone with flexibility training could work free given time. Another amateur mistake. The interior of the van was modified for prisoner transport. The windows were tinted black, the back area separated from the driver's compartment, and there were additional restraint points welded to the floor and walls. This wasn't improvised. Someone had invested money and planning into this operation. As they drove through the darkened streets, Sarah began her escape assessment. The van was older, probably early 2000s Ford. The modifications were professional, but not sophisticated. No GPS jammers she could detect, no communication equipment visible. The radio in the front was tuned to a local station, not encrypted channels. "Where are we going?" she asked. "Somewhere quiet," the leader replied from the front passenger seat. "Somewhere we can have a nice long conversation about financial responsibility." The broad man sat beside her, occasionally checking his phone. Each time the screen lit up, Sarah caught glimpses of text messages. Most were too quick to read, but one phrase stood out. "Package secured." Proceeding to secondary location. Package. Military terminology. These men definitely had some connection to armed forces or law enforcement. But the sloppy execution suggested they were either retired, discharged, or never made it past basic training. The van turned onto a gravel road, the sound of loose stones pinging against the undercarriage. They were leaving the main roads, heading somewhere isolated. Sarah's window of opportunity for a soft rescue was closing rapidly. After 20 minutes of driving, the van stopped. Sarah heard the driver talking on his phone, but couldn't make out the words over the engine noise. When he finished the call, the broad man beside her finally spoke. "End of the line, soldier girl. Time to see if your training prepared you for the real world." They pulled her from the van into what appeared to be an abandoned industrial area. Warehouses stretched in both directions, most with broken windows and rust-streaked walls. Perfect place for activities that required privacy and sound dampening. The warehouse they chose was in slightly better condition than the others. The loading dock doors were intact, and dim lighting was visible through the windows. Someone had been using this place recently. Inside, the space was larger than it appeared from outside. Concrete floors, high ceilings with exposed beams, and the lingering smell of motor oil and metal shavings. In the center of the main floor, someone had set up what could only be described as an interrogation station. A metal chair bolted to the floor, portable lighting, and a table covered with items Sarah couldn't identify in the dim light. This wasn't about money or gambling debts. This was something else entirely. "Sit," the leader commanded, gesturing to the chair. As they transferred her restraints from behind her back to the chair arms, Sarah noticed something that made her blood run cold. On the table beside her, partially hidden under a tarp, were items that didn't belong in a simple kidnapping. Military-grade communication equipment, detailed maps of Fort Bragg, and what appeared to be classified operation schedules. Collins reached for the tarp and pulled it away completely, revealing the full scope of what lay on the table. Sarah's training in intelligence and counterintelligence immediately cataloged each item. Encrypted satellite phones, detailed base schematics that were definitely not public information, personnel files with photos and personal details of her team members, and, most disturbing of all, medical records that could only have come from classified military databases. Impressive collection, isn't it? Collins said, noticing her examination of the materials. Took us 6 months to gather all this. Amazing what you can buy when you know the right people. Sarah kept her expression neutral, but her mind was racing through possibilities. 6 months meant this operation predated her team's current mission assignment. Someone had been planning this for a long time, targeting her specifically before she even knew she would be deployed to Syria. The broad man, who Collins called Henderson, positioned himself behind her chair while the third man, introduced as Pike, remained near the van keeping watch. The positioning was tactical, one person to maintain psychological pressure through proximity, one to ask questions, one to monitor for interference. Here's what we know about you, Sergeant, Collins continued, opening one of the personnel files. Sarah Elena Martinez, age 29, born in El Paso, Texas. Father was career Army, killed in action in Afghanistan when you were 16. Mother remarried a civilian contractor, moved to North Carolina. You enlisted 6 months after high school graduation, specifically requesting infantry training. He flipped through pages as he spoke, each detail correct and verifiable. But the level of personal information suggested sources that went beyond normal background checks. Rangers at 22, youngest female to complete the full program at that time. Deployed to Iraq for 2 tours, Afghanistan for 3 more. Decorated for valor under fire, expert marksman, specialized training in explosives and communications. Current assignment involves deep reconnaissance missions in hostile territory. Sarah remained silent. The basic biographical information was available through standard channels, but some of the operational details Collins was citing were classified above her pay grade. Someone with significant access was feeding information to these people. But here's what makes you special, Collins said, setting down the file and leaning forward. Your team doesn't just do reconnaissance. You're designated hunters. High-value target elimination, off-the-books operations, the kind of missions that never make it into official reports. Now Sarah was genuinely concerned. What Collins was describing was accurate, but that information existed only in the most classified databases. Either someone very high up in the chain of command was compromised, or these men represented a much more sophisticated operation than she had initially assumed. What do you want? She asked finally. Collins smiled, but there was no warmth in it. We want to know about Operation Nightfall. Sarah's blood went cold. Operation Nightfall was her team's code name for the Syria mission, a designation that had been assigned only 72 hours earlier in a briefing attended by fewer than 20 people. If Collins knew that name, then someone in that room was a traitor. Never heard of it, she lied smoothly. Henderson's hand landed heavily on her shoulder. Wrong answer. Collins reached for one of the encrypted phones and speed-dialed a number. After a brief conversation in what sounded like Arabic, he hung up and turned back to Sarah. That was my employer confirming that Operation Nightfall is proceeding as scheduled. Your team ships out in 6 days. Target is a compound outside Damascus where certain individuals have been providing information to American forces. Information that some people would prefer remained private. The pieces were starting to fall into place. This wasn't just espionage, it was counterintelligence. Someone wanted to stop her mission, which meant someone had a vested interest in protecting whatever or whoever her team was supposed to eliminate. My employer is willing to pay handsomely for specific details about your insertion route, your extraction plan, and, most importantly, the identity of your intelligence source inside Damascus. Sarah's training had included extensive preparation for exactly this scenario: capture, interrogation, and attempts to extract classified information. The standard response was name, rank, and serial number until rescue or escape became possible. But this situation was different. These people already knew classified details about her mission. They weren't fishing for information. They were confirming specific intelligence they had already obtained from another source, which meant they might know more about Operation Nightfall than she did. You're wasting your time, she said. I don't know anything about Syrian operations. Collins nodded to Henderson, who produced a tablet computer from his jacket. The screen displayed a live video feed from what appeared to be a residential neighborhood. Sarah recognized the location immediately, her apartment complex. Your roommate Jessica is having a quiet evening at home, Collins said casually. Nice girl. Teaches elementary school, volunteers at the animal shelter on weekends. It would be unfortunate if something happened to interrupt her peaceful life. The threat was clear, but it also revealed something important. They needed her alive and cooperative. If this was purely about stopping the mission, they would have simply eliminated her. The fact that they were using leverage meant they needed specific information only she could provide. Jessica has nothing to do with military operations, Sarah said. Of course not. But she has everything to do with your cooperation. You see, Sergeant, we're not unreasonable people. We're business professionals handling a business problem. Your mission threatens certain business interests. We're offering you an opportunity to prevent unnecessary complications. Collins stood up and walked to the table, selecting what appeared to be a financial document. Swiss account, already established in your name. $2 million, accessible immediately upon completion of our arrangement. All we need is for your mission to encounter unexpected difficulties. Sarah studied Collins more carefully. His clothing was expensive but understated, his speech patterns educated, his tactical knowledge extensive. This wasn't a criminal trying to make money from kidnapping. This was a professional intelligence operative working for foreign interests. What kind of difficulties? She asked. The kind where your team discovers their intelligence source has been compromised. The kind where your extraction point is suddenly crawling with hostile forces. The kind where American soldiers don't come home from missions they should never have been sent on. The scope of what Collins was proposing hit Sarah like a physical blow. He wasn't asking her to betray operational details. He was asking her to participate in the murder of her own team members. You're asking me to get my people killed. I'm asking you to prevent a larger conflict that would result in significantly more casualties. Your mission, if successful, will eliminate someone very important to certain regional stability arrangements. His death will trigger responses that your government hasn't adequately planned for. Collins returned to his chair and leaned forward intently. But if your mission fails due to compromised intelligence, then alternative arrangements can be made. Arrangements that don't require American body bags or congressional investigations. Sarah realized she was at the center of something much larger than a simple elimination mission. Her team was apparently targeting someone whose death would destabilize existing intelligence relationships in Syria. Someone important enough that foreign operatives were willing to kidnap American military personnel to prevent his elimination. How do I know any of this is true? She asked. Collins reached for another file and opened it to reveal satellite photographs of a compound in the Syrian desert. The images were recent, high-resolution, and showed extensive security modifications that weren't present in the intelligence photos her team had been shown during mission briefing. Because your mission planners are working with 6-month-old intelligence, while my employer's information is current as of yesterday. Your team is walking into a trap, Sergeant. The only question is whether they walk into it blind, or whether someone who cares about them provides updated information. Henderson moved from behind her chair to stand beside Collins. Clock's ticking, soldier girl. Your roommate's going to bed soon. Be a shame if she didn't wake up. Sarah looked at the photographs again, noting details that definitely hadn't been present in her briefing materials. Additional guard towers, vehicle barriers, what appeared to be electronic surveillance equipment. If Collins was telling the truth, her team would be walking into a significantly more dangerous situation than they had trained for. But there was another possibility. Collins could be lying, using sophisticated forgeries and psychological manipulation to convince her to betray her country and her teammates. Intelligence operatives were experts at creating plausible scenarios that justified cooperation with enemy forces. I need proof, she said finally. Collins smiled and reached for one of the satellite phones. After dialing a number, he activated the speaker function. The voice that answered spoke English with a slight accent Sarah couldn't immediately identify. Status report, the voice said. Package is secured and negotiations are proceeding. Subject is requesting verification of intelligence accuracy. One moment. Sarah heard keyboard typing. Then, the voice returned. Sergeant Martinez's team received updated mission briefing at 14:30 hours today. Insertion route modified to approach from the northeast instead of southwest. Extraction point moved from Grid Romeo 7 to Grid Romeo 12. Intelligence source identified as Asset Designation Goldfish. Sarah's heart stopped. Every detail was accurate, including the asset designation that had been assigned during this afternoon's briefing. Either Collins had incredibly sophisticated surveillance capabilities, or someone in her chain of command was feeding information directly to enemy operatives. Collins ended the call and looked at her expectantly, convinced. Sarah's training warred with her growing realization that something was seriously wrong with Operation Nightfall. If Foreign Intelligence Services knew operational details that had been decided only hours earlier, then her team was compromised before they even left American soil. But cooperating with Collins would make her a traitor, regardless of the circumstances. And there was still the possibility that this entire scenario was an elaborate test of her loyalty, conducted by her own people to verify her security clearance. "I need to think about this," she said. Collins checked his watch. "You have until sunrise. After that, events will proceed regardless of your decision. But I should mention that your friend Jessica's safety depends entirely on your cooperation. My employer values results over sentiment." Henderson returned to his position behind her chair while Collins walked to the communications equipment. As he began making phone calls in languages Sarah couldn't understand, she focused on what her training had taught her about escape and survival. Collins studied her for a long moment, then reached for a laptop computer that had been hidden beneath the documents on the table. As the screen came to life, Sarah could see multiple windows displaying what appeared to be real-time surveillance feeds from various locations around Fort Bragg. "Your friend Jessica is in her kitchen making tea," Collins said, rotating the laptop so Sarah could see clearly. The image showed her roommate moving around their apartment, completely unaware that she was being watched. "Camera resolution is excellent. We can see she's wearing the blue pajamas you bought her for Christmas last year." Sarah's stomach tightened. The detail was too specific to be coincidental, and Jessica was indeed wearing those exact pajamas. Either Collins had incredibly sophisticated surveillance capabilities, or his people had been watching her personal life for months. But that's not the proof you really need, Collins continued, closing the apartment feed and opening a new window. The new display showed what appeared to be an encrypted communication channel, with messages scrolling past in real time. Sarah recognized the format immediately. It was the same secure messaging system her unit used for operational communications. "These are intercepts from your team's communication network," Collins explained. "We've been monitoring all traffic related to Operation Nightfall since the mission was first conceived." Sarah watched the messages appear on screen, each one containing operational details that should have been impossible for outside parties to access. Insertion times, equipment manifests, personnel assignments, backup protocols. Everything her team needed to execute their mission was being transmitted in real time to Collins and his employers. "How?" she asked quietly. Collins smiled grimly. "Your communications security officer, Staff Sergeant Williams, has been experiencing significant financial difficulties. His daughter requires expensive medical treatment that military insurance doesn't fully cover. My employer offered to help with those medical bills in exchange for access to certain communication protocols." The betrayal hit Sarah like a physical blow. Williams had been with the unit for 3 years, had saved her life during a firefight in Afghanistan, and was someone she trusted completely. The idea that he was selling operational intelligence was almost impossible to accept. "You're lying," she said. Collins opened another window on the laptop, this one showing financial records. Bank transfers, medical payments, deposits that corresponded exactly with major operational briefings. The evidence was detailed and damning. "Sergeant Williams has been feeding us information for 8 months, Collins continued. "Not because he's unpatriotic, but because he's desperate. His daughter Emma has leukemia, and the experimental treatments that might save her life cost more than a staff sergeant makes in 5 years. Sarah felt sick. She remembered Williams mentioning his daughter's illness, remembered the unit taking up a collection to help with medical expenses, remembered seeing him working extra shifts to earn additional money. If Collins was telling the truth, Williams hadn't betrayed his country for money. He had betrayed it for love. But Williams' cooperation created an unexpected problem, Collins said, closing the financial records and opening a new set of documents. Your unit is more effective than anyone anticipated. The intelligence you've gathered over the past 2 years has severely damaged several business relationships that my employer values highly. The documents on screen were target lists, elimination records, and after-action reports from Sarah's unit's previous missions. Every successful operation was documented in detail, including outcomes that had never been made public. Your team has eliminated 17 high-value targets in the past 18 months, Collins said. Each of those individuals was someone my employer preferred to keep alive. Your success rate is becoming problematic for certain business arrangements. Sarah began to understand the scope of what she was facing. Collins wasn't representing a foreign government trying to stop a single mission. He was representing private interests that had been systematically damaged by her unit's operations across multiple theaters. Operation Nightfall is different, though, Collins continued. Your target this time isn't just another arms dealer or terrorist financier. Dr. Hassan Khalil is a scientist whose research into chemical weapons detection has saved thousands of American lives. His elimination would be a tragedy that serves no legitimate military purpose. Collins opened another file, this one containing Dr. Khalil's biographical information and research history. The man was a legitimate scientist, educated in American universities, who had been providing intelligence about chemical weapons programs throughout the Middle East. Dr. Khalil discovered that certain Western corporations were selling chemical precursors to terrorist organizations, Collins explained. His research identified the supply chains, the financial networks, and the individuals responsible for enabling chemical attacks against civilian populations. Your mission to eliminate him isn't about national security. It's about protecting corporate profits. Sarah stared at the documents, her training in intelligence analysis automatically processing the information. If Collins was telling the truth, her unit was being used to eliminate someone who was helping prevent terrorist attacks, not enabling them. Why should I believe any of this? She asked. Collins reached for one of the encrypted phones and dialed a number. This time, when the call connected, he handed the phone to Sarah. Sergeant Martinez? The voice was familiar, though she couldn't immediately place it. Who is this? Colonel Thompson. I'm calling to inform you that Operation Nightfall has been compromised. Your team is walking into a trap, and I need you to abort the mission. Sarah's blood went cold. Colonel Thompson was her commanding officer's superior, someone she had met only twice, but whose authority was unquestionable. If he was involved in this situation, then the compromise went to the highest levels of her chain of command. Sir, I'm currently being held against my will by unknown individuals who claim to have intelligence about our mission. I know exactly where you are, Sergeant. Mr. Collins is working under my direct authority to prevent a catastrophic intelligence failure. Operation Nightfall was designed by elements within our own organization who are working contrary to American interests. The revelation that her own colonel was involved in her kidnapping fundamentally changed everything. Either Thompson was a traitor working with foreign agents, or Collins was telling the truth about the mission being compromised from within. I need independent verification of your identity, sir, Sarah said, applying protocol she had been taught for exactly this situation. Your verification phrase is Desert Storm Eagle 7. You received those words during your security briefing last month. Sarah's heart sank. The verification phrase was accurate, known only to personnel with the highest security clearances. Either Thompson was genuine, or the security breach was far worse than anyone had imagined. Sir, what are your orders? Cooperate with Mr. Collins to prevent Operation Nightfall from proceeding as planned. The mission has been corrupted by individuals who are using our unit to eliminate legitimate intelligence assets. Dr. Khalil is not our enemy. He's our most valuable source of information about chemical weapons programs in the region. Collins took the phone back and ended the call, then opened another file on his laptop. This one contained intercepts of communications between Pentagon officials and corporate executives, discussing the need to eliminate Dr. Khalil before his research could expose their business relationships. Your real enemy isn't foreign terrorists or hostile governments, Collins said. Your real enemy is a network of defense contractors and intelligence officials who profit from regional instability. Dr. Khalil's research threatens to expose how American corporations have been supplying materials for chemical weapons attacks. Sarah studied the communication intercepts, noting names and organizations she recognized from intelligence briefings. Some of the individuals involved were senior officials in the Department of Defense and the CIA. If the documents were authentic, they revealed a conspiracy that extended to the highest levels of the American government. "What do you want me to do?" she asked finally. "Provide your team with updated intelligence that will allow them to complete their mission safely while ensuring Dr. Khalil escapes capture. My employer values Dr. Khalil's continued research more than any short-term tactical advantage." Collins opened a final set of documents, these ones containing detailed intelligence about the compound where Dr. Khalil was supposedly located. The information was far more current and accurate than anything in her official briefing materials. "Dr. Khalil knows your team is coming. He's prepared to provide additional intelligence about corporate-sponsored terrorism in exchange for protection from the individuals who want him eliminated. Your mission can succeed, your team can survive, and American interests can be genuinely served." Sarah looked at Henderson, who had remained silent during most of the conversation. His expression was unreadable, but she noticed he was no longer watching her with hostility. Instead, he seemed to be waiting for her decision with something approaching respect. "How do I know this isn't just sophisticated psychological warfare?" she asked. Collins reached into his jacket and produced a satellite phone different from the others. "Call Fort Bragg directly. Ask for Colonel Patterson, your unit commander. Ask him about the medical bills for Staff Sergeant Williams' daughter. Ask him about the source of funding for Operation Nightfall. Ask him why Dr. Khalil's elimination is considered urgent when he's never been designated as a terrorist threat." Sarah took the phone but hesitated before dialing. Once she made this call, she would be crossing a line that couldn't be uncrossed. Either she would discover that her own command structure was compromised, or she would reveal to Collins that she was willing to communicate with outside parties without authorization. "One more thing," Collins said quietly. "Your team ships out in 4 days, not 6. The timeline was moved up this afternoon after someone noticed discrepancies in the communication intercepts. Your people are running out of time." Sarah dialed the number for Fort Bragg and asked for Colonel Patterson. When he came on the line, his voice was tight with stress. "Martinez, where the hell are you? Your roommate reported you missing 3 hours ago, and base security is going crazy trying to find you." "Sir, I need to ask you some questions about Operation Nightfall." There was a long pause. "This line isn't secure for that conversation." "Then, make it secure, sir. I'm told our mission is compromised and our team is in danger." Another pause, longer this time. "Who told you that?" Sarah looked at Collins, who nodded encouragingly. "Someone who claims to be working with Colonel Thompson to prevent our unit from being used against American interests." "Jesus Christ," Patterson muttered. "Stay where you are. I'm coming to get you personally." "Sir, I need answers first. Is Staff Sergeant Williams' daughter receiving medical funding from outside sources? Is Operation Nightfall being directed by Defense Department officials with private business interests?" The silence that followed told Sarah everything she needed to know. When Patterson finally spoke, his voice was heavy with exhaustion and anger. "Sergeant, you're in the middle of something that goes way above my pay grade. Yes, Williams has been compromised. Yes, our mission parameters have been influenced by individuals whose motives I'm not allowed to question. And yes, your team is probably walking into a situation that serves private interests more than national security." Sarah closed her eyes, feeling the weight of betrayal and responsibility settling on her shoulders. Her own command structure was compromised, her teammate was being blackmailed into treason, and her unit was being used as a private army for corporate interests. "What are my orders, sir?" "Officially, return to base immediately and prepare for deployment." Collins began untying her restraints as he spoke, a gesture that marked a fundamental shift in their relationship from captor and prisoner to reluctant allies. Sarah flexed her wrists, restoring circulation while keeping her guard up. Trust was still a luxury she couldn't afford. "The updated intelligence we have on Dr. Khalil's compound reveals significant changes from your official briefing materials," Collins said, spreading detailed photographs across the table. "Security has been tripled in the past week. Your planned insertion route now leads directly through a kill zone that wasn't there when your mission was planned. Sarah studied the aerial photographs, comparing them mentally to the maps she had memorized during mission preparation. The differences were stark and deadly. Where her briefing materials showed minimal security, these updated images revealed guard towers, vehicle barriers, and electronic surveillance equipment that would make a covert approach nearly impossible. Your team is scheduled to insert via helicopter at Landing Zone Alpha, Collins continued, pointing to a location on the map. But satellite imagery from yesterday shows that area has been mined and is covered by overlapping fields of fire from concealed positions. Henderson, who had been quiet for most of the evening, finally spoke up. Lost a lot of good men to bad intelligence during my tours. Seeing soldiers walk into traps because someone back home is scheduled. Unofficially, do whatever you think is right to protect your people and serve your country's actual interests. Sarah understood. Patterson was giving her permission to act independently while maintaining plausible deniability for himself and the chain of command. Understood, sir. She ended the call and handed the phone back to Collins, who had been listening to her side of the conversation with obvious satisfaction. So, Collins said, "Are you ready to discuss how we're going to save your team and accomplish your real mission?" The restraints holding her to the chair were sturdy but not impossible to defeat given time and opportunity. The warehouse had multiple exits, but at least one guard was always watching. The van was the only visible transportation, and she didn't know how many additional personnel might be stationed outside the building. More importantly, she needed to determine whether Collins was telling the truth about the mission compromise. If Operation Nightfall was genuinely walking into a trap, she had a duty to protect her team members even if it meant appearing to cooperate with enemy operatives. But if this was psychological warfare designed to turn her into a double agent, then resistance was not just the right choice. It was the only choice that preserved her honor and her country's security. As Collins finished his phone calls and returned his attention to her, Sarah made a decision that would determine whether she lived or died, and whether her teammates survived their upcoming mission. "I want to see more proof," she said. "Show me evidence that my team is really in danger." Someone wasn't just after her. Someone was after information about her unit, her missions, her access codes. This wasn't random criminal activity. This was espionage. And that changed everything about how she needed to handle the next few hours. The leader pulled up a second chair and sat facing her, his expression now serious rather than menacing. "Let's start over, Sergeant Martinez. My name is Collins, and we need to discuss your upcoming deployment to Syria." Sarah's heart stopped. The Syria mission was classified at the highest levels. Only a handful of people knew about it, and none of them were supposed to be sharing that information with criminals in abandoned warehouses. Collins noticed her reaction and smiled grimly. "Now I have your attention. Good, because what happens next depends entirely on how cooperative you decide to be."